Next item, Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, RPC. Research Planning Committee proposes to amend the text of Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, Chapter 14, Communication Support Structures and Related Facilities. These amendments would remove the regulatory exemption for individual towers serving one property and instead exempt all towers 50 feet or less in height and all state-defined small wireless facilities. Allows neighbors to waive setbacks, clarify how to show FCC and FAA compliance or non-applicability, allow out-of-state licensing of tower engineers, allow for alternatives besides letters of credit or performance bonds to ensure obsolete towers are removed, and renumber 2 existing sections.
So this is Mariah. I will give you a little background, and then you can tell me to go to any pages in the chapter that you think you might want to look at. As far as in the packet itself, the materials on packet 1 start on page 68. So now, the actual petition. As you know, we in chapter 14 of the Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, that's where we regulate communication towers of all sorts, whether it's TV, radio, broadband, etc. Phone. We've gone through a number of iterations of this ordinance over the years, and last month we voted to sponsor for public hearing the amendments that we'd actually looked at in January as a possibility, but received so much back then. And anyway, so this is what you decided to sponsor, I think, is maybe what we called last time the good faith first step. I'm going to remind all of you that this, the way the state statute works for tower regulations is quite a bit different than state statutes for other types of ordinances we normally deal with. So if a town in a county that has tower regulations adopts its own ordinance at the town level of the same statute number, the county ordinance is no longer in effect in that town. And as is true for all of our ordinances, our county ordinance does not apply in the 4 villages or the city. So the city of Sturgeon Bay and 4 villages, that's Egg Harbor, Ephraim, Sister Bay, and Forestville, they don't regulate this completely separately on their own. And then we do have a number of towns in Door County that have chosen to adopt a town level ordinance, which essentially means that they've opted out of the county regulations. And those towns are Bailey's Harbor, Egg Harbor, Jacksonport, Liberty Grove, Nassauwappee, and I believe as of last night, the town of Gibraltar, but I have not received anything about that yet today. So we're talking about an ordinance. Yes.
Okay. They have the right to opt out or to have their own zoning for towers.
For towers, yes.
For towers only.
Actually, it's an ordinance, not a zoning ordinance.
It's under zoning
authority.
Okay, yeah, I just.
Yeah, so they can opt out of chapter 14 of our ordinance, is what it comes down to by adopting a town ordinance.
Okay, given that the municipalities, 5 municipalities are out, and those certain towns are out, just how much of the county does the county cover with their status? What across chapter 14?
If Gibraltar, town of Gibraltar opted out last night, which I don't, like I said, I haven't heard, and if they give us the correct paperwork, then that would mean that 8 of the 14 towns are covered by this ordinance, but nowhere else in the county.
8 of the 14.
Right. So it's making it in reverse.
No, that's okay. So we cover 8 of the 14
with this chapter. Right now, we technically cover 9, but like I said, I think Gibraltar has opted out and will have the paperwork.
All right, it's a long time, but if I may, why doesn't, given the makeup of Door County, okay, the cliffs and everything else, why doesn't every town just get out of that chapter 14 and control it on their own. Wouldn't that be more simple? Because the county could impose a statute that, yeah, satisfies this area, but will not cover this area. There could be towns that have areas that our rules aren't going to work for them.
So,
or am I missing something?
No, you're onto something. So as Dave, in the notice, it spells out what these amendments would do. So there have been concerns over the last handful of years, obviously, over access to broadband. There were some very specific things in the code that were easy to fix or tweak, or I should say fix or tweak, to clarify how we've either been applying those provisions or to even make them more lenient. What the proposal that you put forth doesn't do is exempt broadband towers, and that's what essentially the towns that have all adopted their own ordinance have exempted broadband towers. So that's the difference. But as you point out, one of the options is for the county to keep its ordinance, whatever it's going to look like, and the towns that don't like it to just adopt their own and apply those rules within their town boundaries as they see fit. And that today is what 5 of them have decided to do, maybe 6. Like I said, I haven't.
And they can do that whether we pass this or not.
Correct. They can do that tomorrow.
Okay.
That's one of the rare items that are in the statutes. They are permitted to make their own rule that would reserve us.
Right. Normally, like say, let's talk about a land division ordinance. Like the land division ordinance statutes would say, all right, counties and towns can adopt those, but both would be in effect. This is not that way. This is if the town adopts one, then only the town regulations are in effect.
Vinny, did you have anything real quick?
Do you want me to walk through the regulations actually would do? I mean, the notice really does spell it out. So I don't know whether you want me to scroll through the actual chapters.
Why not real quick? Just try to do it real quick, and
okay.
We've been at this for multiple meetings.
But let me also remind, because some of the audience may not know process-wise. So again, in January, we brought these exact proposals to you, and at that point, there were people in the audience, and it wasn't a hearing, but there were people that spoke saying that they wanted more changes. Then we were supposed to hold a meeting with the towns to get all of their input, whether they were in the ordinance or not, or thinking about getting out. And then that meeting got canceled due to COVID-19. So
you also submitted an email to them asking them to respond, right?
So County Administrator Ken Paddock said, why don't you try and collect the information via email? So I sent 2 or 3 emails, provided the ordinance changes, sent a list of questions to all the towns.
And this is all 14 towns, right?
Correct. I sent it to all 14, and I had different subsets of questions. So if you're out, answer these questions, please. If you're in, answer these. If you're in but thinking about getting out, answer these. And so that was what we looked at last month. And you'll recall, and I can pull up last month's packet if you want. We only heard from a couple of the towns in response to those inquiries. And then, so that's why last month you just decided to go ahead and sponsor what was in front of you, because we didn't feel like we had enough quantitative and quantitative information from the towns to decide how we're to proceed. So the amendments that got sponsored, I'll just kind of scroll through, are some of the first changes show up on page 71 of the packet. Would exempt any structures, and support structure means either the tower or what it's stuck onto, that are 50 feet or less in height. Any wireless facility, this is a new provision in the state statutes, and this is one of the reasons we actually need to do amendments, because we don't have anything that talks about small wireless facilities under this new law. But the way this set of amendments is written, small wireless facilities, as the state defines them, whether they are in or outside of a right-of-way, would be exempted. And that's what all of this is literally the language right out of the statutes as far as the definitions. It does, I skipped one thing that's kind of.
I guess as a reminder too, it's the red print that's
correct. Yes.
Part of the changes, just so the audience is aware of that.
Yes, the red fonts are the proposed changes. The part that would be a change, which I am sure the opponents see as a negative, is with this sub D here. Language like this has been in the zoning ordinance since the mid-90s, if not before that, where satellite dishes, antennas, et cetera, all that kind of stuff has always been exempted. We've been using that provision for years to exempt residential towers, but it's come to our attention that that probably is a misread of that section. The reason that the words structures for residential satellite dishes has been struck is that we didn't, you don't want somebody to build something really tall just to be able to stick an antenna or dish on it or whatever it is in order to be able to get around the height limitations.
I don't want to cut my trees down.
So that is the provision where we've previously exempted individual towers, but I think we may have been stretching it as far as the interpretation. So at any rate, the new proposal in red is anything 50 feet or less in height. That number was picked because that matches the state wireless facility general height exception. Continuing on, sorry if anybody watching is getting seasick. Let's see.
76.
Pages 76 and 77. 11 and 12 have to do with FCC and FAA compliance. We're not changing how we do anything. We're just trying to make it clear how we've been interpreting these sections. Basically, we just need the piece of paper that you can get for free, and always have been able to get for free from FCC or FAA online that shows whether or not the rules apply to you and whether, and if they do apply, then you need to do more of it. Most of the time it's free and it's one page, and whether we have this in our ordinance or not, people that are building towers are supposed to be doing this. The next change, number 13 on page 77, we've previously required that the engineer regarding the mobile service support structure or tower design be licensed in Wisconsin. We're changing that to just say licensed engineer.
79.
Yes, thank you. The setback or fall zone requirement, we've always had basically 1.1 times the height of the tower has been the required setback. The state actually changed the regulation to just say that the setback should equal the height of the tower, so that's what we're doing. We're getting rid of that plus 10%. We're also adding a new provision, which is that if a neighbor is willing to waive the setback or fall zone requirement in writing, and by in writing, I should say we accept things like email or just whatever, then you can waive that setback requirement for that particular tower. I should also say with regard to setbacks and fall zones, we've already had a provision in the ordinance for the last 4.5 years where if an engineer can say, this 100-foot tower is going to fall down within a 25-foot circle, then 25 feet becomes your setback. That's what we use for your setback, not 100. And that's already in there.
And as a person that has worked with towers in the past, anybody that manufactures towers already has that data in existence.
Correct.
Anybody that builds the towers already figured that crumple zone.
Right. So we've always used the crumple zone as a setback. This would allow even that to be waived by a neighbor. Let's see. This on the bottom of page 81 has to do with we've always required either a letter of credit or a performance bond to ensure that if a tower becomes obsolete and the company or owner or whatever doesn't take it down, that there be money on hand to be able to remove the tower. Instead of requiring the performance bond or the letter of credit, we're just saying that there needs to be something recorded in the register of deeds that relates to that property that assures that that tower is going to be taken down and the site restored in compliance with this ordinance. I think that might be it, because all we do at the end is renumber some things. We basically flip the order of 2 of the sections. And this broadband network, it's called Broadband Forward at the state, section 196.504. That's a certification that we added a couple of years ago at the request of the Economic Development Corporation and others. And this is a state broadband forward certified ordinance. So, but yes, those are all the changes that are proposed.
Vinny, did you have a question?
Sure, thank you. Mariah, I know we've had a long meeting, but if you could just go through the basics for the committee and for the public listening as well, what the process of applying for a broadband structure is. I have the application form from the website in front of me here from your office, and just the basics. What is the fee? What's the length of time that it takes? And I guess it's just in response to lots of I agree with we need to be able to expand the capacity of broadband in the county, but I'm not sure that our ordinance has anything to do with it. So I'd just like to be able to see how we can show what that process is actually like for someone applying.
It's relatively similar to applying for a regular zoning permit. It's what we call an over-the-counter permit, so there's no public hearing. The fee, in order to get broadband certified by the state, we had to change the fee for broadband towers to $100. So that's what the fee is, and that includes your building and your tower, if there is a building. And again, it's pretty similar to a regular zoning permit, and those we process usually within a couple of weeks. And once we get a completed application, as with any permit, sometimes it's time consuming for people to get all the pieces of information to us, but as far as our processing, it usually just takes a couple of weeks. And there's actually, once we have a complete application on file, we are required to act on it within a certain number of days. I have to go dig for the page in the chapter, but it's written right into the statute that we have I want to say it's less than 10 business days to reach a decision. But I have to go look at it. So it's fairly simple. And that's true anywhere in the old, when we had a standalone ordinance, less than 10 years ago, towers were only allowed to go in certain areas. We're not allowed to do that anymore. So now they can go to any zoning district. Or in an unzoned area if it's an unzoned town.
So that to that fee question, that is true. That also carries down to the municipalities that have their own.
To the what question?
The fee question, there's written right in the statute, there's a window of time, number of days, there's a fee in that stuff. If the town municipality creates their own ordinance that will restrict this one, they have to follow the same regulations. They may put no fee at all if they want to, but.
Right. I'm not sure if you have to have the $100 fee if you're not trying to get the broadband forward certification, but I know that if you want the certification, you have to have your fee only be $100.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Just expanding on it a little bit, it does, but another section of that or part of that would be kind of going through like the steps on the application as far as proof of liability insurance, deed and lease agreement, proof of FCC, which you mentioned already, and FAA, engineering report. These are all in construction plans. These are all typical things that provide, I'm making the assumption, for the common good of the person erecting the tower and anybody living near it or using it in any way so that the basic needs of it are met.
Right. As I mentioned, when we looked at the FCC and the FAA sections where we're just trying to clarify how we've been applying it, those are things that anybody that's putting up a tower is supposed to be checking anyway. I guess I would assume most people are using an engineer that's constructed the tower. The county, even for towers that are exempt, they are supposed to be checking with the county to make sure that whatever they're doing is not going to interfere with the county emergency services, critical lines of sight for communication towers. I'm not sure if that's always happening for those towns that have exempted themselves, but yeah, those are all things that people are supposed to be doing anyway.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah. No.
Well, did anybody get a call from an individual worried about these towers going up and claiming how going from 4G to 5G is so detrimental to our health, and the studies are coming out?
I haven't got anything.
I have not received anything. I'm certainly aware of different frequency issues that do arise as we increase the frequency, which is what 5G is doing.
Okay, the reason I ask,
that's a telephone issue. Keep in mind, a cellular issue.
Okay, this individual contacted me. Someone got my name. I said, "Well, I'm on the committee. We're talking about those towers," and she seemed to be it. That was what she's talking about. And I said, "Well," she says, "I've got a video for you to watch." I said, "Well, send it to me." I gave her my email address and she gave it to me, and that was it. You know who I am. I was leery to open up, thinking I was going to open up some massive virus in my computer. So I just wanted to, now I could certainly bring this computer to you or to your office, and you can, or I should go to maybe the place where I have my computer worked on, ask them if it's safe to open it.
Why don't you just forward it to?
And can I forward it without opening it?
Correct.
And then that doesn't affect.
No, you don't have to open anything to do that.
Okay. Well, I will.
You are right in being concerned about opening attachments to something you don't have a clue.
That's for sure.
Okay. So I didn't do that. So
I received it. I guess I'm trying to understand. Was somebody trying to correspond with you with regard to this hearing?
yes.
Okay, because I don't think I got
Yes.
that, whatever that was. So if you want to forward it to Jason so he can make sure it's safe.
Yeah, that'd be
I could
appropriate.
enter it into the record, but I wouldn't have received it in a timely manner. So.
No.
All right.
Questions?
Do you want me to call on the first person to testify, or did you have other questions?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
I have received, and I'm sure most of us 21 have received and heard comments about how we need to alter this chapter because it is so restrictive and prevents towers from being installed. And you know, I've read through the chapter numerous times. I was here with the last revision of it. I don't see the verbiage that says that to me. But I know a lot of people are being led to believe, and then those people that are talking to me saying that, you know, we need to change this because they're being told outright, I can't put a tower here because the ordinance doesn't allow me to do it. So my question for you is, based on those kinds of statements, including a couple of chairmen of the town boards around here, I am not aware of interpreting any part of that ordinance. And I'm sure whoever's listening is bound to say something. That outright says a tower can't be put just about anywhere in the county that's not some sensitive area like the shoreland. Is that an appropriate statement?
There's nothing in this chapter that prevents you from putting a telecommunication tower, whether it's broadband or otherwise, anywhere in the county except for a wetland or within 75 feet of the actual ordinary high water mark.
And both of those are partially driven by other state statutes.
Well, the wetland one is ours, but no, actually, I take that back. I think you couldn't put one in a wetland under state rules either. So yeah, those are other rules.
So I would like to, I'm basically making sure that if I understand correctly, I've never read this ordinance to interpret that it is not allowed at some locations within this county. There is, however, certainly physical locations where, due to trees, due to cliffs, you might not receive a signal, but that is not an ordinance issue.
Correct. So I think, and we've got the same calls from angry clients at our office wondering why we don't allow towers in their town. And so we always have to explain that it's not that we don't allow towers, it's that you need a permit in order to put one out. And yes, there are rules. And sometimes maybe a tower can't go where it is that the person wants it because it can't meet one of the rules, but.
And a personal note, I use my phone for almost everything, including Skyping, my network, my laptop, my computers, my printers, everything. I have been up on the other side of this peninsula, up in Garden, Michigan, and been able to do Skyping. So it's an issue. I have difficulty in accepting people stating that, you know, we need to do all this stuff in order to receive this. I'm doing it on 4G cellular. So there's nothing in there that's really interfering with any of that either. There's no guarantee that somebody's going to put a tower where somebody wants it just because we changed the ordinance.
Oh, I see what you mean. No, I mean, if you change the ordinance, tower companies are going to put towers where it makes business sense for them to do it. Yes.
They're unlikely to put one up for one customer unless that customer pays for it. That would be a reasonable business discussion.
I should clarify or just remind you and maybe make it clear to the audience that even though this is kind of an oddball of a state statute that this chapter is adopted under, this is still part of the Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance. And so what that means today is that you have three options. You can, well, you're the applicant, so it's a little bit different, but you can choose to recommend these proposed changes in red to the county board for adoption as they're presented to you.
And that means in near instant
Right, so
activation.
that would go to county board at the end of June, and if you make the recommendation to do it as they're presented and the county board accepts that recommendation, they go into effect that day. So I think it's June 23rd.
Right.
You can make a recommendation to county board, or the county board could decide that they want to modify what's proposed. They want to take these but add more or whatever it is. That action, it would happen June 23rd, but the ordinance would not go into effect for 40 days. So it would go into effect extended July. Or normally with a text or a map amendment, you also have the ability to deny. It'd be a little bit weird to deny your own ordinance. I think if you were inclined to not to, quote, deny it, that maybe you would just say, we're going to withdraw this and go back and write something else and sponsor something else. But you technically could send a denial report to county board and say, we don't recommend making these changes. That'd be a little weird, but you could.
Okay. Any other questions real quick? This is a reminder. If any, yes.
I have one, Mariah, about the section in there on page 86, section 9, that talks about many of these things we already covered, environmental standards, setbacks, wetlands, and then the removal assurance piece. I'm just kind of guessing that that's an expensive item that might be prohibitive, but I feel that it's important because what we do if someone walks away from one of these large towers and it needs to come down, then who would have the responsibility of taking that down if we didn't have any removal assurance? Can you address that a little bit?
Technically, I'm not quite sure how we would go about requiring or assuring the compliance for the removal of the tower and the restoration of the site without having some money on hand. I think this was just sort of a goodwill or good faith effort for us to put forward to say, all right, fine, we've heard that it's expensive to do performance bonds or letters of credit. We'll give you this other option where there will be something that's recorded that's against the deed for that property, but you're correct that it doesn't actually guarantee there's gonna be money there.
But without doing anything, there definitely wouldn't be any way to have that assurance. So I'm glad that it's in there.
Right, okay.
And the way I justify accepting it is it does put it on the onus of the property owner, which means that if it gets sold to somebody, if they don't do a title search, it's recognized that tower is maintained and the concern of the property owners. Otherwise, I prefer to see money put aside for those same reasons because people do walk away and don't expect it and have to deal with it. Any other questions? Hearing no questions, we will move into the testimony side. In the case of the in favor, that's counting the RPC. We've already talked about that, so now we're in the opposition.
Yeah, everybody that registered to testify was either opposed or not in favor is proposed. David Studebaker, can you hear us?
I'm here.
Okay.
David, before you speak, as a reminder to the rest of the people, it would be appreciated if we mitigate the repetitiveness of some of the comments, just to have things move forward. If you want to reiterate that somebody else had said one of your comments so that we know that you are also concerned about that, that's great.
Okay.
Name and
Since I get to be first, I'll try not to repeat myself.
Name and address, please.
My name is David Studebaker. I live at 11823 Timberline Road, Ellison Bay. I live about a mile outside of Newport Park. Zoning ordinance, chapter 14, section 1404, which is what I'm speaking to, is really about internet services.
We have a
Door count. Yes, sir.
David, I put up on the screen your letter that you said you wanted up, which is page 167 in the second packet.
Fine, I'll refer to that later. Thank you.
Would you rather have me have something else up?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Door County must immediately start working on developing utility quality, reliable, affordable, high-speed internet service access for our whole county. Addressing the regulatory problems with Chapter 14, 14.04, will allow the county to do that as a whole county. It's time to focus on that goal, improving our internet services in order to support our local economy, the needs of our visitors, and our own quality of life. I just want to make it clear, I'm not speaking for the town of Liberty Grove, nor am I affiliated with any business. My goal talking today is just to try to help us all move forward together. I've been heavily involved in the quest for better internet services in Door County for over 10 years. Before I retired, I spent over 50 years designing and developing computer software. And one point of clarification today, whenever I say broadband or internet, I basically mean the same thing, although technically they are different. You all know how important access to the internet is. If that wasn't obvious last year, the pandemic has made it painfully obvious. There was an effort a couple of years ago to get the internet recognized by the FCC as a utility, just like telephone and electric service. The giant corporations lobbied that town because they didn't want to have their rates regulated, and they didn't want to be required to supply service where they couldn't make enough profit for their shareholders. So even though we all use and need access to the internet as if it were a utility, it's not regulated or funded like a utility. At this point, we have to look out for ourselves. We have to do everything we can to encourage and support and invest in the development of quality, reliable, high-speed internet access for everyone, everywhere in Door County. For the past several years, we've not been doing that. In 2015, Door County adopted the Chapter 14 Ordinance, which regulates cell phone towers, radio towers, and soon small cell towers, and also the small towers that are used to provide wireless broadband services where internet access isn't being provided by cable or by a good connection over a phone line. And relative to the phone lines, now we have a bankrupt phone company. For reasons I don't understand, Chapter 14 regulates the small profile wireless broadband towers the same as it does the 10 to 20 times larger cell phone towers. I want to mention as an aside, the state passed regulations in, I believe, 2013 on cell phone towers and radio towers, and more recently on the small cell towers. The state does not have, nor does it require, regulation of broadband towers. The regulation that Door County has passed adds thousands of dollars in construction and administrative costs to each small tower. Basically, it's 50 to 100% of the cost of the tower is added by the regulation in 14.04. As a result, no business could economically justify building a dedicated wireless tower under those regulations. And after I finish my statement, I'd be glad to answer any questions about those incremental costs. The real question is, now what do we do? The answer is we have to do a number of things. The first thing is you, the RPC, must change Chapter 14 so it doesn't kill the construction of broadband towers. The simplest way is to add an amendment like the one in my handout, which Mariah's now displaying on the screen inside the box. That would remove the cell phone tower regulation burden from broadband internet towers. I urge you to either adopt the amendment I've recommended or to remove section 14.04 from Chapter 14. Making this change will not solve Door County's lack of adequate internet services. It will help a little, but it will allow us to begin working together as a whole county. We need to develop a whole county strategy, not a town-by-town approach. For a county-wide internet build-out, it must include a variety of technologies, each to be utilized where they make sense. The strategy must include fiber optics, cable where it already exists, and high-speed fixed wireless, that's broadband, in the sparsely populated areas like where I live. To do this in a reasonable time, not decades, Door County will have to seek out, qualify for, and properly implement major federal grant funding for a large-scale internet infrastructure construction effort. This will be a multi-million-dollar challenge. and it will require a coordinated effort by a wide variety of civic, government, school, medical, neighborhood, nonprofit, business, and other groups. The first step is the one you have to do now. You need to eliminate the regulatory roadblocks currently placed on the construction of fixed wireless broadband towers in Door County. Like that old saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It's now your responsibility to take that first step. Thank you for listening to me, and I'll be glad to try to answer any questions you might have for me.
Benny, did you have a question?
Sure. Thank you for your statement. And you mentioned in there that 50 to 100% of the cost of putting up a broadband tower is spent on regulations. Could you explain some of those costs?
Well, if I may pick one, for example, and I haven't found the exact paragraph at this moment, but there's a requirement for a finished gravel or blacktop drive to the tower with an appropriate turnaround. That's quite appropriate for a cell tower, but for one of these broadband towers, which typically are about 2 feet across, they're quite often set back in a field or near a woods in an open space, and they're accessed by a truck over 2 tire tracks. If it's and typically they're a couple anywhere from 200 to 400 feet up or 500 feet off the road. So if you're familiar with the cost of gravel driveways, then I would estimate that be at least $20 a running foot. A $200 200 foot, if you could do it $200, 200 foot driveway times $20 a foot is going to be about $4,000. If the tower itself, to start with, costs $15,000 to $20,000, I'm not including the equipment that goes on the tower, just the tower. You've already added 20 or 25% to the cost of the tower.
Thank you. The regulatory roadblocks, maybe this is in the same category. I appreciate hearing them, but I guess if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you define as a regulatory roadblock, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Well, a little one is there's a requirement to that a written notice to be provided with any airport within 5 miles of the tower. It's an unnecessary administrative item in terms of these towers. The maximum height of any one of these towers is under 200 feet. And the reason for that is because at 200 feet, FAA regulations kick in, tower has to be lighted, so it's just not economically appropriate. That was one example. I'm sorry, I don't have my list in front of me, but there are several others that are notifications or certifications. And each of those things is a relatively small item, but there are additional administrative costs that generally wouldn't have to be provided. And we're talking about man hours or person hours here, not money paid to the county.
A question to that. I used to cite wind turbines, and the FCC regulations were pretty clear that you had a 5-mile radius that you had to communicate with them, period. So where am I missing that you're not on the same page as I am?
I don't know anything about wind turbines. What I do know is...
Okay, let's step back and say Met towers, which is exactly the same towers as this is.
I'm sorry, what kind of towers?
Met towers are communications. They're meteorological towers. They're basically identical to these things. And if you put a tower within 5 miles of an airport, you need to communicate with the FCC.
You know more about that than I do then.
So that's only asking you to verify that you've done it. I understand that, the ordinance request. If we can step back to the driveway question.
Yes, sir.
I only see the drive, am I missing something, Mariah? I only see the driveway underneath the class 1 and class 2 locations.
Can you give me a page?
Page 76 of, I believe the first packet was in there. The driveway is actually back, it's, 19, page 80, sub D, driveway and access.
May I interrupt for a moment?
Sure.
The challenge here for these towers, I mean, you understand that these towers run 2 feet to 36 inches across.
No, let's stop for a second. That's why I was asking, the class 1 and class 2 co-locations are cellular towers, typically, right?
These are not cellular towers. And that's part of the issue here is these towers are being regulated with the cellular tower regulations.
David, just a second, because I'm looking for a clarification of where I may have a misunderstanding. The roadway surfaces that regulations that I see is underneath the chapter for class 1 and class 2 co-locations. All applications new class 1 and class 2, class 1 co-locations or class 2 locations, page 76.
Right, the other sections of the other subsections of the chapter do refer back to that, but it's an as applicable, so again, it depends on exactly what's going on, so.
So it's not a mandatory driveway.
I'm trying to think of ever.
Yeah.
If I may state, the ordinance, section 1404 refers back to, in their entirety, sections 1401, 13 through 21. And section 1401 is specifically for cell towers. And so those sections in total are referred to under the broadband tower. And I'm not saying that there should not be any kind of regulations for broadband towers. The best answer to addressing this ordinance, but it takes a fair amount of time, would be for section 1404 to be written specifically for broadband towers and take their issues into account. But that's not the way the ordinance is written. And you say, for example, that an item says where applicable, but a small company, and most of the broadband towers are built by small companies. Spending the administrative time and the legal fees to chase these things down and find the exceptions is money they don't have to spend. So basically what the end result is, they don't chase it down and those towers don't get built. They go somewhere else where they can spend their money more productively. And that's what's happened in Door County. Since the regulation, the ordinance was passed in 2015, there have been few, if any, broadband dedicated towers built in the areas covered by this regulation. New towers in Door County have been built in the towns that have opted out. And it's just not the right way to do it.
I'm just looking for clarification because I didn't see a requirement for a driveway to be built. In any respects for these things, it was strictly underneath the co-location regulations and referenced back as applicable. So I was looking for you to help me understand how you were interpreting it, that a driveway was mandatory.
And to be honest, I'm not sure that we've ever enforced that. I think we've
Right.
assumed that if you're putting in a tower that you're going to need to be able to drive to.
It would not be smart for a small business putting up a tower to make an assumption that what was written in the ordinance was not going to be enforced. If it's in writing in the ordinance, it's the law.
David, people call us all the time to find out how we interpret sections, but I can see why that might be confusing. I think the section we relied on more is the last part where it says the permitting, location, design, and construction shall conform to any applicable requirements established by the town. I think that's what we kind of defaulted to.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure it's understood that if I was missing something, that driveways are not mandatory.
Well,
And
let me,
how you were-
I found the driveway thing, so let me refer to you. It's in paragraph subsection 19 in 1401, paragraph C.
Yeah, which is all,
Put it up on screen.
which is underneath the co-location. The cellular co-location regulations.
He is correct that the broadband stuff refers back
No.
to that 1401.
But it's as applicable.
Right, and
So
then
it's not a mandatory, I guess is what I'm getting at.
again, to quote Grant, case by case basis,
Yep.
depending on.
Okay, sorry, I just want to make sure I get my understanding correctly and clear. Any other questions?
I have another one.
Any?
Thank you. And this may come out with people who are testifying ahead, but I'm just seeing that there's no other regulatory roadblocks that you see, David, besides the gravel driveway. And then you said just in general, like the human or person power that it takes to administer the application. And we kind of went through previously that all the items on the application are based on state requirements or things like not putting one in a wetland, making sure that you've notified the FCC or FAA. So are there any other regulatory roadblocks that are costing small businesses money that you think are a problem in this ordinance as it's to be amended today?
I believe there are, but I am not prepared enough this evening to give you the list. There's, I'm going to say 4 or 5 items, and there is one, by the way, open-ended item, which my wife and I owned a small business for several decades, and I can tell you that I would not sign an agreement that had that in it. And I'm looking for, I can't find the exact wording, but it allows the land use department to, at their discretion, engage a third-party contractor consultant to evaluate the, oh, I found it, by the way. It's in, I've got to find all the numbers here. Section 14, subparagraph 14, part D,
14.
part F, sorry, part F.
14.14.
Engage a third-party consultant to review the application permit at the applicant's expense. And I just, as a small businessman, I wouldn't sign that.
Well, that's only if the application, I'm assuming, is of a nature that the local, this has been pretty standard for it, that the local land use department is unable to decipher and understand the regulations, and I want to make sure everything follows through.
But there are no qualifications, no notifications, no nothing. It just says at their discretion. It's not reasonable for a small business to sign something that open-endedly allows somebody else to spend their money.
Well, then I'd have to throw out just about every building code I have to follow through with, because every one of them uses that as a reference point.
Well, that's disappointing.
Well, it's a state, federal, and international regulation. So Vinny, are your questions answered?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, David. Steve Jenkins?
Now my comment, I believe Steve is calling in, so I'm going to unmute what showed up on my screen is
Okay,
caller
Steve,
3. Are you Steve Jenkins?
on our end, we're unable to figure out who is who on the call-ins, so we're going to have to unmute one at a time to find you.
Steve Jenkins, are you caller 3?
Maybe we should ask who call 3 is.
It's Trish. Steve Jenkins, are you caller 7?
Hello?
Steve, is that you?
Hello?
Steve, is that you?
Is this Steve Jenkins?
Hello? Hello? This is Steve Jenkins.
Oh,
Well, we can hear you, but can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes, Steve, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Mr. Chairman, members of the RPC and staff, my name is Steve Jenkins. My name is Steve Jenkins. I am the Executive Director of the Door County Economic Development Corporation at 185 East Walnut in Sturgeon Bay. The COVID-19 pandemic crisis underscored the importance of broadband service in rural areas, including Door County. As communications became extremely important during the pandemic, the frustration by many over the lack of service became acute. Over 50% of Door County is without adequate and reliable broadband service, impacting and possibly endangering lives and livelihoods. This must be addressed in a comprehensive approach, and implements that prohibit robust broadband service must be eliminated. This includes removing the limitations on broadband towers and not combining those with regulations controlling larger cell towers or communication structures. Broadband is now an essential infrastructure addressing public need and necessity. Broadband service is not only an essential infrastructure in today's world as a lifeline of communications, but also necessary for economic growth and prosperity for any community. Broadband is necessary for such important functions as telemedicine and distance learning, as highlighted during the pandemic when rural school districts had to purchase hotspots so their students could continue their education. Broadband service is also essential for remote work and solo entrepreneurs. Door County has an abundance of remote workers and solo entrepreneurs, and it is anticipated that those segments of the economy will see significant growth post-pandemic. Many current remote workers and solo entrepreneurs complain about the lack of or inconsistent broadband service. National research has shown that the average per capita income of this segment is $80,000 annually, with little or no impact on public service costs, result in decreased traffic and reduced pressure on the natural environment. But they do need robust, reliable internet service to function. It is the official position of the Door County Economic Development Corporation that all restrictions on single-use broadband towers be completely removed from Chapter 14 of the Door County Zoning Ordinance. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to look for Kyle Letke. Just ask who it is.
Is this Kyle Ledke? What else is his name?
Sebastopol Schools he's tied to.
Oh, that would be special.
Yeah.
True. Kyle, is this you? Kyle?
Okay. Next one.
Kyle, is this you?
Wow. There's another one in there.
So
I thought there was another one up higher.
there was only one. I tried. Caller 7 was Steve.
Yeah. Okay.
Kyle, is this you? Caller 3, can you identify who you are? And
You don't know what number we are?
okay, whoever just talked, you're caller 3. Have you registered to testify?
Yes.
Can you tell me who you are so that when we get you on the list, I can find you?
Sure. I'm Pam Gillespie.
All right, Pam. Okay, I got your text earlier. Thank you.
Cool.
So I don't know where Kyle went. Should we skip? He did write a letter.
Ryan, is it possible to unmute everybody just for a minute and only ask the person you're naming to speak and then remute everyone?
Well, I think we know who everybody is now except for Sebastopol TV. I can try them again. Hello, this is Mariah. Can you please identify who you are? Hello? We move on to the next person.
Yeah, try the other stats, we'll just see what happens, we'll go to the next one.
Hello, this is Mariah in the public hearing. Can you identify who you are? Okay. Kyle did send a letter. I can't remember if it went in the first packet or the second packet. He's the superintendent of Sebastopol schools. He used a lot of the same examples that Steve Jenkins did in his testimony. And I believe there are other people from other schools on here. I think there's still Gibraltar people on here. So my guess is his testimony will be similar, but we can try and come back and find him. So then, the
Grab Wales. There we go, yep.
Here. Gwen and Joe, can you hear us? Gwen and Joe, can you hear us? Joe and Gwen, can you hear us? Are you ready to testify?
Hey, Patrick Hickman.
Okay.
Patty, sorry. Patricia. There we go.
Sure. Am I unmuted?
Okay, yep, thank you.
Okay. I sent you a letter.
Name and address, please.
Oh, sorry. Patricia Vickman, and I'm the superintendent at Southern Door School District, and my address is 2073 County Highway DK, Brussels, 54204. So I am writing a letter in support of whatever kind of flexibility you can put in place as a county government to be able to assist our students and our families and our businesses here in Southern Door with greater broadband internet services. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. I have written letters to support NASAWAPI's grant that they put in place to get broadband as well. The use of technology to engage our students has become an important part of today's education. That became even more critical the past 10 weeks when we were faced with the challenge of a closed school and having to do remote learning. We had to purchase over 150 hotspots to ensure that our students had access to virtual instruction. We knew that about 80% of our parents said they had some kind of internet service. That was based on a survey we had done 2 years ago. However, we found that when it came time for remote learning, their internet connection was either underconnected, constrained due to service interruptions, so slow in speed that multiple users at home could not be accommodated, or it was limited only to their smartphones. And so this was all a result of the lack of broadband connectivity. In the letter that I provided you, there is a link that shows you all the hot spots in Southern Door, which is primarily the entire 200 square miles, which is about half of the county's landmass. While we have worked as a district to obtain broadband through the county's broadband, it significantly makes a difference for our students when they go home. High-speed home internet is no longer a luxury, but a necessity for our students' access to learning. Especially in a rural school, we don't have the ability for students to go to the local public library and be able to have Wi-Fi access like some of the urban centers have. While many rural districts face the complication of increased weather compromised days, never did we believe that our real need for internet service this year was not going to be the occasional snowstorm, but it was going to be having to do remote learning the past 10 weeks. And that will possibly be the case if COVID-19 comes back even stronger this next year. The current broadband landscape in Southern Door is not a plausible solution for students and for staff. And as a vice president of the Southern Door Business Association, our businesses also struggle with reliable internet services. It's a huge factor in families and businesses relocating to a rural area. 3 years ago, a family chose our community as a place to raise their children and one in which they hope to continue their international business. After a year of frustration with the lack of internet accessibility, they left the area and moved to the Fox Valley area in order to sustain their livelihood. Realtors have also shared that the lack of internet service in the area has negatively impacted home sales for young families that are looking to move into our school district. I applaud the county for its consideration to modify the current county Chapter 14 power ordinance so that townships and municipalities can have some greater flexibility to make internet service a priority, particularly for the residents in our community. It is the assistance of government, like yourself, broadband providers, businesses, and schools that all pitch in to do their part to close the digital use gap that currently exists. I happen to live on the county line between Door County and Kewaunee County. It was only when Kewaunee County had relaxed their guidelines and they were able to put up towers that I was able to get access to high quality internet service. I was unable to get that kind of service in Door County. So I know you have a tough decision to make and there's lots of considerations and I don't really understand all of the ins and outs of the regulations, but I am pleased that at least you're considering some flexibility to be able to assist our students and our families. Thank you for allowing me to have this time to talk with you.
Any questions? Nothing from Benny?
And I have heard from Gwen and Joe, they have called in a different ways.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Gwen and Joe, I guess we got a hold of them.
Joe and Gwen, can you
Yes,
hear?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, go ahead.
Name and address.
Okay. Mr. Anibal, Chairperson, and members of the Resource Planning Committee. My name is Gwen Grayboys, and my husband Joseph and I live at 5343 South Lake Road in the town of Sebastopol, District 15. Thank you for allowing us to present our testimony in opposition to the proposed amendments to the Chapter 14 ordinance as relates to broadband towers. We wish to emphasize several key points as you are all in receipt of our letter written June 2nd. We ask you to vote against the amendments as proposed to the Chapter 14 ordinance, as it will not improve access to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet throughout all districts of Door County, particularly those in our rural areas. In fact, the regulations and proposed amendments discourage expansion of broadband. Piecemeal opting out of Chapter 14 ordinance by individual townships will substantially disadvantage Door County from successfully competing for federal grants to assist with paying for high-speed internet access. We propose that all broadband towers self-supported at 125 feet or less in height and guide wire supported at 200 feet or less in height be excluded from the ordinance as written. At the 50-foot height restriction, broadband towers are not high enough to often provide signal over trees and cliffs. Many areas in Door County have insufficient cell phone service to allow its use for internet access. High-speed internet is a critical factor in moving all of Door County forward by allowing strong economic growth and development, by promoting education not only through K through 12, but also beyond, by assisting in the safety and security of our residents, by improving property value and tax base, and by maintaining an informed electorate. We strongly encourage you to vote to create an exemption for broadband towers in the Chapter 14 ordinance. Thank you for your service to our community and for your time in considering this very important issue that affects all of our Door County now and going forward together.
Any questions for Gwen?
I have a question for Mariah regarding Gwen's testimony. Is that okay to do now?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Mariah, do you have an idea of if we were to exclude broadband towers from our ordinance, what would that look like for someone wanting to put a broadband tower up? How would it be different than what our ordinance is now? Would they still have to follow the state regulations that are required that are like kind of passed through our ordinance, or what would that be?
I mean, I guess it would depend on what you did. If you put in an exemption, which a couple of people have asked for so far, so it's been, I think 2 different people have said 125 feet or less for self-supporting and up to 200 if it's got guy wires. If you exempted them completely from the chapter, then the only thing that they would need to do from the county standpoint would be they would again need to check those county critical lines of communication to make sure new towers weren't interfering with county tower lines of sight. As I understand it, they would still on their own need to be dealing with the FCC and the FAA and any other state or federal or local regulations that are in place. But I guess it would depend what you meant by exempt them from our ordinance. Would they be exempt from everything, or would you be exempting them from certain requirements? Like Mr. Studebaker suggested maybe rewriting the broadband section that we have to have the regulations different for those types of towers. So I think we've gotten 2 different sets of suggestions.
Yes, and I'm not really supporting one or the other right now. I was just trying to clarify for my own thought and for people listening as well that there are some regulations that would exist for broadband tower, even if, as Steve, I'm sorry, I was back in my notes here, as was recommended, if we were to not require this at all, there are still regulations that broadband towers would have to follow based on states entities, right? I guess I'm trying to see what the gain would be for someone putting up a tower if it was not regulated by the county. It's not that it's just unregulated.
It is and it isn't, because so the regulations that we put in our chapter are for the most part straight out of the statutes. But if the county didn't, let's say the county didn't have an ordinance at all, the state doesn't enforce those. So I don't think that a tower owner operator needs to go to the state to follow these same rules. These are just something similar to what the state did with wind turbines and solar energy and a couple of other things over the years. They've said, okay, if you're going to regulate this thing, then this is what you're allowed to do, what you can regulate and what you can require. But they don't themselves enforce those regulations in a county that hasn't adopted an ordinance. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. Gwen, was Joe going to testify also, or just you?
No, we were fine, just one of us speaking, given the hour of the evening.
I'm glad you texted since you've been waiting since 1 o'clock.
Given Finney's question, my question to that is, economically, the cost given to the county to follow those regulations as presented, or to get rid of the regulations as asked about, what are we talking about? What is the cost monetarily to get a permit now that they would not be paying if we did not require regulations for 125-foot towers?
You mean, okay, so like, let's say you wiped out chapter 14?
Well, let's say we exempted 125-foot freestanding towers. What is the cost? Everybody talks about the regulatory problems of regulating these items that the Door County is imposing. I'm failing to see what that is. That people can't give me specific examples, and maybe some of the other individuals that are about to speak. I don't see that there's really a big change in, wow, we just saved 6 weeks worth of processing time.
Well, again, yeah, so our permit fee is $100.
So it's a $100 fee.
Mr. Studebaker did point out the driveway section. Honestly, I'm not sure that we've ever.
We'll call that a case-by-case issue, and that's a sensible thing.
There's no cost to go online and plug in your information to the FCC and the FAA to get the piece of paper that is spit out.
Yep, I've done that for.
Assuming that you are exempt.
I've done it for
If you're not exempt, then you've got other things to worry about. Well, now with these proposals, you would be removing you'd be requiring them to record something at Register of Deeds, which is what, $40. Instead of doing a performance bond or like.
And that item is really safeguarding the neighboring landowners.
You're required to have insurance, but presumably most companies have
liability insurance anyways.
And we don't require, like, you basically just need to, give us whatever you call the kind of cover sheet stuff that comes with your insurance policy to show us that you got it. And
so it'd be difficult to say that we're really removing all that many restrictions per se by exempting them.
As David pointed out, you might be saving some administrative time, I guess, for the companies.
Thank you. How about Pam Gillespie, number 3?
She is. Pam,
right here.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Fine.
Okay, my name is Pam Gillespie. I live at 165 Clearland Road in Claybank. I'm right off of County U, just south of Lower LaSalle Park. I'm like Superintendent Bickman in the very southern portion of the county. I have to say I've learned quite a bit as I'm listening here today. And it sounds like, even though we've had a couple of people speak, you're having a hard time pinpointing what in the statute or what in the ordinance has maybe limited the construction of broadband towers. And I wish I had the answer for you. I don't. I do think, especially based on what we've heard so far today, that Door County needs to do everything they can to encourage broadband towers to be installed. And sort of just to corroborate that or back it up, let me tell you a little bit about this. The road I live on here along the lakefront, we've got 24 homes, and those 24 homes have intermittent cell service and no internet service. The only internet service that they can get is satellite, and that is unreliable and expensive and really puts it out of the reach for a lot of folks. At least one of the homes on this road can't get even the satellite service because of the way it's situated. Of those 24 homes, 8 are for sale. Some have been on the market for 2 or 3 years. And I know it's unlikely that the lack of connectivity is the sole reason why the owners want to move or they haven't been able to sell the properties. But I do know that the lack of internet connection and ability to, the lack of internet connection does play a role in the situation. We had at least one family that had school-age children, so they were forced to leave in order to allow their kids to keep up with their education. We've had another home where the sale was, everything was pretty close to a go, but it fell through when the purchaser found out that they couldn't work from home because the internet service just wasn't there. And like other folks, once this recent stay-at-home order was imposed and the internet became so very important, it just highlighted the fact that no one on my road could work from home. They couldn't do Zoom calls. They couldn't take online classes. We were very handicapped. And just as an aside, a personal example, I attempted a Zoom call with friends, and the only way I could communicate with them was to use a whiteboard for my portion of talking because the internet it wouldn't carry the whole thing. The problem is that our number, with these small number of homes is so small that no provider is going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to provide us with service. So any way that the cost can be brought down so that we can encourage someone to provide service to this area would be really appreciated. I don't know that I have that answer or that what you've got in this ordinance would address that. It seems to me that the suggestion that broadband be treated as a separate animal, and that regulations that not only keep an eye on any problems that might be there, make sure that the county gets its licensing fees, but also encourages the installation of those towers is something that really needs to be looked at. I took a look at Chapter 14 and saw that the intent of the chapter is not to have the effect of prohibiting the provision of mobile service. And based on some of the information I've received, it sure looks like there have been some roadblocks put in the way of folks, and service, at least in my location, is pretty prohibitive in order to just wouldn't put towers here because they're too expensive. I wasn't aware that my town, Clay Banks, could impose their own regulations, and so I have no idea if they responded to you or if there's any sort of work that they have done. So that's something that I'm going to have to check out on my own. But thanks so much for listening. I know now, since I don't have the actual ordinance sections in order to point them to you, that it probably wasn't very helpful. But I waited for so long, I had to actually talk.
Just to clarify, Claybanks has not adopted its own regulation, but there was a broadband tower that went up earlier this year in Claybanks. Claybanks has quite a few different rules, and so we had to have a public hearing at this body for that tower, but that's not usually part of the process. But that might have been if you heard me mention Claybanks earlier, but they are under the county regulations.
Okay, so it was not all for naught. So if they did have their own regulations, I was sitting here for a long time for nothing. Okay, thank you so much.
Does anybody have a question for her?
I have one. I'm not sure. Thank you for waiting and for speaking. You mentioned some of the roadblocks to the cost of the towers in your area, and I think that you said you didn't know for sure if any of those came from this ordinance. Can you just clarify that? And I guess I keep asking this of each person because I'm really trying to focus on, for us, like how we can do something with this ordinance that does help with this issue. And I'm not finding it or seeing it, so I'm searching. Thank you.
And I appreciate the fact that you're searching. I don't have the answer to that. I found out about this hearing yesterday, so I'm kind of scrambling just to get my arms around what the current chapter says. I do know from attempting to get internet service down here, and having people come and test and see if, they can get it through the cell phone, or if we can put up our own tower, if we can do whatever in order to get it, that in conversations with installers, the bottom line is it's just too expensive to put in your typical, what I understood to be a cell tower. It might be a broadband tower, I don't know, in order to service this small an area. I wish I could point to the portions of the ordinance. Like I said, I just looked at it for the first time this morning, so I can't help you with that. But it certainly seems to me that there's enough concern and enough need that perhaps broadband should be spun off so that there can be some considered investigation to find out what those differences are, and perhaps to help not only the students but the residents in Door County.
Thank you.
My 2 cents about that particular road, you do live in a very dense area, very difficult area. I have a friend that lives on the road and it's work down in that road. You are also living in one of the hardest service areas for our 911 services. We do not have very good tower communications for anyone along that road either. It's the nature of where it is. We're working, there's a planned tower to come in there for our emergency services, but it's probably a couple more years down the road.
So we all better stay healthy, huh?
It's a beautiful place though.
It is beautiful, yes.
Any other questions?
I have one again, sorry, just pertaining to this for Mariah. Is there was mention that you mentioned that you had to do a public hearing for that particular tower in that area. Are there things that towns or villages that are within county zoning still, do they have overlays to these tower ordinances that could be part of an issue that prolongs the process or adds administrative costs? And I'm not trying to point a finger, I'm really just trying to work through each of these and find a solution. Thank you.
the fact that tower in Claybanks that AT&T put up a handful of months ago, that it required a conditional use permit as a state requirement because it was in the exclusive agricultural zoning district.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's nothing we can do about that requirement.
So to that effect, the exclusive ag has quite a few state regulations that make it a little bit more time consuming to get projects done.
Yes,
And that,
including a tower. But that's the only town that's true for, because they're the only ones that have that zoning district.
but that's substantially the entire town almost.
Right, it's most of Claybanks.
Yeah, most of it is zoned.
I mean, not the shoreline.
Right.
It's most of the rest of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks a lot.
And Eric.
I'm not seeing an Eric. Wait, no, we already did colors. We could go to Jerry Work is definitely on.
Okay, we can go Jerry. Jerry Work.
Jerry, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
I'm Gerald Warwick. I live at 5122 Bay Shore Drive, Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, in the town of Sebastopol. And I still serve on the Economic Development Committee's broadband committee, and that's why I got really interested in this whole topic. I got onto that committee because I was so frustrated with broadband here in Little Harbor, the area where even the sheriff's deputies say that they have horrible reception on their communication devices. So I went ahead and put up my own 100-foot tower in order to have broadband. But not everybody can do that. And if you look at if I understand right, you're going to limit private towers to 50 feet. And that's going to be useless because most trees are more than 50 feet tall, and you won't be able to get broadband through that. In my past life as the hospital administrator, I really became more and more aware of the issues of broadband in the rural world. There's a real divide occurring between the haves and the have-nots. The haves being the urban areas, the have-nots being the rural areas. The problems we have here are not new to a rural. I think it's taken a long time for rural to really recognize that broadband was more than just playing games, but it's really not part of our life structure. I tell people often that if the country had adopted electricity in the same way we're adopting broadband, there would be large segments of rural America and probably large segments of Door County without electricity, because the way those two adventures have been attacked are totally different. One through, you can read history about how they did electricity, but we're not doing the same thing with broadband. The questions I've enjoyed the conversation today, and a question I have for Ken Fisher is when you made the comment like, well, then why don't all the towns get out of the county broadband regulations? My question is, what's wrong with the county broadband regulations that almost half of the towns have already left that regulation? There obviously is something there, and I think it behooves the committee to find out exactly what that is. You know, we keep talking about it, and questions say, well, it doesn't seem to be too prohibitive. Well, there obviously something's going on if you've got maybe now 6 towns that have left the overall regulation. The other question is, I don't know if there are that many counties that have regulations over broadband. I think Door County is unique, and that's the way when I'm on when this committee would meet, that's kind of what it became apparent to us, is that Door County is unique in regulating broadband. Most counties do not regulate broadband, and there's the rub. So I guess the question has to be raised: why are we regulating broadband? Why are we pulling broadband in the same regulations as cell phone towers? Because towers aren't towers aren't towers. The other thing is I would expect, not necessarily this committee, but I would expect the county to begin seriously working through a strategic mechanism with a goal of, we want 95% of our county residents to have broadband. I would think that the impetus from that would be coming from the county itself. What can we do? When I was working in the hospital world, I sat on the a technical committee of the Office of Rural Health. You cannot believe the millions and millions of dollars that are sitting out there just through that office for broadband for rural areas. Same with the Department of Agriculture. There are pockets and pockets of millions of dollars sitting out there for public use by counties, by governments, to be able to bring broadband to their communities. I would think it would be wise for the county of Door to set up an office or a program, or at least an individual whose primary goal is to sort out where these pockets of money are to use in this county. But more importantly, I think it would be the role of the county to be the leader in what can we do to make sure that our citizens have access to this valuable commodity, which now becomes a necessity. And the other speakers have said before me, the pandemic has certainly shown the importance of good broadband throughout the county. And not, and it's not going to be done by just doing town by town. It's got to be a county-wide approach. I think one of the other question I have is, has anyone ever talked to Door County Broadband as to why they're no longer building towers in Door County and are now building towers in Kewaunee County, since the Kewaunee County eliminated its broadband prohibitions? I think that's an important question to ask. I've always felt, even on the committee, there's always been a friction between the county and the broadband providers. I don't know what that friction is all about. I would think you would all want to work together for the betterment of our county. So I leave you with the challenge. I think this will only be served when the county says this is a number one or number two priority for our county, and we're gonna barrel ahead and do whatever we can do to see that broadband is in vast majority, high numbers, 80%, 90%, 100% should be the goal of people who live here. In closing, some talked about real estate, and that's true. A couple of years ago, a real estate person was telling me that now when you sell your property, you have that disclosure thing, like, do I have water in my basement and all that type of stuff. They now ask a question about, do you have broadband availability? And if you say no, then that takes about $12,000 off the value of your property right there. That's a couple of years ago. It probably is even more now. And so there are economic consequences of not having good broadband. That was my rationale while I put up a tower. It was cost me about $8,000. I figured if I don't put it up, I'm going to lose at least $12,000 whenever time comes to sell our house. So anyway, I think it's still Thursday, but I'll be happy to turn over to any other questions.
Any questions? If you can.
Yeah, thank you. If I understood Mr. Warren right, are we regulating ourselves out of broadband?
I think the question that needs to be asked to the broadband provider, why he has not maybe, and unfortunately we only have one, but it's a I don't know that business model, but I know that they are working actively in Kewaunee County, and kind of like said, Door County, if you want it, you can have it, but I don't know. I think that's a great question to ask them, and ask what's going on here.
Well, the one thing that I see personally is that, a lot of this populace is over the edge of a cliff somewhere, rather than a nice line of sight in Kewaunee County. In reference to the efforts for this body to get input, I've been one of the adamant individuals that we get these towns. I have a difficulty with rewriting an ordinance if 1/3 of our towns are not even in the ordinance or interested in coming back. So I think that the committee and the department has done a very strong effort, and you can see the kind of response we got in multiple efforts to get that input from those other municipalities. You made a comment about 50-foot towers being regulated to only 50 feet. That's a misnomer. That's a regulation in which it is stating that they are exempt at 50 feet and under from any of the regulations substantially.
Correct.
As opposed to stating that we're limited to 100 to 50 feet. And as you noted, there's lots of places where we got 75-foot trees you got to deal with.
That's correct. That's why up to now, before you change this, it's 100-foot towers unregulated on your own property. So now you're telling me if I had decided not to build a tower, but now this regulation passes, I would be forced to have only a 50-foot tower, which would make it.
Not at all.
You would simply need a permit.
Yes.
I didn't need a permit before, so that's another step to go through. The question is, why do you need a permit? Why now? You didn't need it. You didn't need it yesterday. Why do you need it tomorrow?
Okay, so if you own a house that's 10 feet from the property line and your neighbor put up a 120-foot tower without needing any permits, how would you feel about that?
I'd probably be happy because it may give me access to internet.
And if they don't?
Why wouldn't they?
And you live in the middle of a birch woods? Beech woods.
I don't know. I don't know how much complaining there is about that. If that's the rationale, then I'd like to see the justification for it. I'm just telling you that that aspect of the rule is becoming more restrictive and making it so more people cannot do it if they can afford to do it.
And I'm playing other scenarios out there as well. I mean, just because you can put a tower on the property, can you afford the service?
Well, the service is far cheaper than what the cost of the tower is. If you can afford the tower, then you're going to be able to afford the service.
I know my service is cheaper than what I would get from broadband.
Yeah, but you can't get. I understand, but if the choice is between nothing and investing into a tower so you have something, the cost of the service is not even in the calculations.
Any other questions? Thank you, Jerry.
Okay.
I don't think Mickey's online, but Diane McNeil.
Okay, so mark Miss Diane McNeil. See if she can.
Diane, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Everybody's been very eloquent and touched on all the points that I wanted to touch on. Personally, though, because I have a business here on Garrett Bay Road in Ellison Bay. Oops, sorry, Diane McNeil, 12156 Garrett Bay Road.
Thank you.
Okay. That years ago, when there was some development of a condominium or something, they were getting cable. They were going to get cable right to their business. All the business on Highway 42 in Ellison Bay, they all have fixed Wi-Fi. I have lousy Wi-Fi. I have a million trees. So people were asking, how come you don't go down Garrett Bay Road? And they said, it costs too much money. There aren't enough people. And that hasn't changed. Right now, I have a Door County broadband tower that I had to pay for. And it works pretty good, maybe 80-85% of the time, but it's still not what I need because my business depends on the internet to function. And it's a very personal position for me. The other thing is that our granddaughter, who was a graduating senior of Gibraltar, she did her final semester doing distance learning. So I got a firsthand look at how that worked. And I learned a lot about the pluses and minuses and what they needed and what they already had. So I have just personal experiences. But I want to back up Jerry for saying, why isn't the county taking a lead because of all the money that's sitting out there that could help? That to me, all the regulations and the permits and all those things that we talk about, to me, it's why aren't we getting all that money to make sure that everybody gets good Wi-Fi or good broadband? That's sitting out there waiting for us to take it and improve the lives and businesses of everybody here. So I think that's the number one point that we should all be looking at. And I agree that we should develop committees, persons, whatever, and move forward on that. That's all I have to say. And I've learned a lot. I appreciate you giving me my 2 minutes on. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, Diane. Tina.
Yes, hello, this is Tina Van Meer. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm the superintendent for Gibraltar area schools. And first of all, I've been with you since 1 o'clock this afternoon. So I just want to thank you for the work that you do. I really appreciate your efforts and everything you're trying to do. I have to say, the longer I've been listening to this conversation and trying to understand what this is about, for me, I'm hearing that it's really more about trying to support to encourage the expansion of broadband, and maybe that's a separate issue than these regulations that everyone has been talking about. I'm not sure about that, but I know that Superintendent Vickman, as well as our superintendent from Sebastopol Schools, and myself, I shouldn't speak for them, but I know that we would be more than happy to be part of any type of ongoing committee and discussions about the importance of internet access and broadband. I thought Patty did a wonderful job earlier today talking about what we've been experiencing since COVID-19 and the closing of our schools, something that we would have never thought would have happened, and how it's changed the educational landscape. I won't go into some of the things that she said because you have a letter from her as well. I just want to really reiterate to you why it's so essential to have good internet for all of our students. And this is more than just because of what happened during the pandemic, but it's also about what is learning looking like in the future. And I'm looking to the future, and that's why I think future discussions on this would be so valuable. But we really have arrived in a new age of learning. It's critical that students in today's schools have instant access to information. It's no longer practical or responsible to measure our success as educators by the amount of information our students can retain or recall. Teachers are no longer the main source of information, but they're the facilitators of learning. Success is now measured by a student's ability to access information and meaningfully apply it to the real-world problem. We live in a rapidly growing technological world. Today's children have always known a world filled with computers, cell phones, video games, and all types of media. As educators, we are challenged to provide students with the tools and strategies they need in order to navigate the world of ever-changing information. This is a complex and highly challenging task that requires leaders to seek creative ways to fund technology integration and support its use with extensive professional development. At Gibraltar Area School, before the pandemic happened, we were piloting e-learning for the first time for our students. And our ultimate goal during that time was to provide our students with the continuity of learning and instruction, regardless of the weather or other situations that may close down our school campus. While the focus has been to address issues due to snow closures, our hope was to develop remote learning that would lead to other benefits for student access to education. For example, students suffering from a physical injury, long-term illness, or mental health issues could actively participate in their education through the remote learning approach. Reliable access to internet at home is critical to the success for both our students as well as our teachers. And again, I would support any type of relaxed guidelines or restrictions that would limit the restrictions on fixed wireless broadband towers if it will result in reliable, affordable internet access for our students and families and remove the barriers to equity in access for all of our students. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, Tina. Andrew Moore.
Andrew, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Andrew Moore, Director of Technology at Gibraltar Area Schools. My address is 153 East Main Street in Forestville, Wisconsin. I wanted to thank the committee for opening themselves up for public discussion and comment. And I would just like to read this statement and take my comments offline after that. I would ask the Resource Planning Committee to revise Chapter 14 with the goal of encouraging the expansion of broadband internet services into underserved areas of Door County. The Gibraltar Area School District knows of at least 35 families who reported no internet access or unreliable service. Despite providing hotspots that work off of a cellular signal, many reported the hotspots were slow or unreliable. To make matters worse, our educators also struggled with remote learning this spring for the very same reason. Recently, the primary rural service provider of Northern Door, Frontier Communications, filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I cannot expect this news will improve their level of service delivered to residents of Northern Door. Satellite is another option, however, speeds are slow and the delay is high. Satellite cannot support video conferencing, is often unreliable, and prohibitively expensive. Even cellular service providers have failed to make things better for our rural neighbors as new cellular tower construction, as I see it, has slackened over the years. Independent, fixed wireless providers such as Door County Broadband are willing and able to address the needs of our rural neighbors. You could help by drafting regulations that are tailored to small operators like DCB. We don't have to exempt small fixed wireless, but rather apply common sense regulations while fostering an environment that encourages innovative entrepreneurs like Kevin Voss, who has connected so many families who had no other option. That's the gist of my statement, and I just wanted to add that a lot of the folks that reported lack of internet were also in rural areas, not limited to behind cliffs or in tree stands, but in flat rural areas in the center of the county. And with that, I'll take my comments back. Thank you.
Questions? Vinny? Nothing? Okay, we got, thank you, Andrew. Do we have, let's see, we have a Kyle Ledke. Are we able to get reconnected with him?
I don't think he ever, I think Sebastopol TV must be Laddie.
Probably.
I don't know how to unmute all of them.
Yeah.
And I told everybody to text me if they were.
Right, yeah, we got it.
Didn't get a text. He did send you, Kyle did send you a letter.
Yep.
Eric Schreier was supposed to testify on behalf of Door County Memorial Hospital. Jerry touched on that a little bit in his role as former hospital administrator. And then Mickey from Door County North. I'm not sure what happened to her. I think she was on earlier.
Okay, and Eric
Eric is the one that was going to testify on behalf of the hospital.
But yeah, okay. Normally there would be a rebuttal. In this case, there isn't. It's the county and public comment. So we're going to close this public hearing and move into our regular meeting.
Page 1 of your first packet is the agenda for the business meeting, which is what we're now moving into.
We've got a hard copy of it right here too, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, that's it. Okay, we're opening our meeting properly noticed.
Yes.
Okay, quorum present with Vinny being remote. I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Motion to adopt. I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Any alterations, changes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Public comment not related to our past discussions?
Want me to unmute people? Or
Sure.
okay.
Can you unmute all of them? Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, I've unmuted everyone. Just so you know, you've been unmuted.
Oh, no. Just looking for a public comment on anything other than the two topics we had today. correspondence?
I'm just gonna still communicate to it individually. Okay. If you go to page 3 in your packet, I provided email correspondence that I sent to all the. Well, I sent it to anybody I already think of in the county. I sent it to the plan commission chairs, board chairs, and clerks of the zoned towns. This is several towns and businesses had called asking what we were going to be doing during this season during COVID-19 because of all the recommendations from the CDC and everybody else to try and have as many activities outdoors as possible to kind of spread out restaurant tables and retail displays and that kind of thing. So
by this season, you mean summer season?
Correct, this tourist season, yeah. So I had talked to Grant, and I took the liberty of going ahead with Grant's okay of just, and the city administrators, of making this option available. So hopefully you're okay with it, because I've already sent it all over the place. I wanted to get it out before Memorial Day, so that the business associations can distribute it to their businesses. I did send it to all the unzoned towns and the incorporated municipalities, and I've heard that some of them are using it as templates for their own activities.
That's the one that says they can go outside, but if the bar/restaurant has seating capacity of 100, they can have 100 outside, but not anymore.
Right. Yeah. So the basic idea, the people that called me first were concerned about restaurants, but then a couple of us realized that it also relates to retail as well. So the basic idea is that if you are an authorized or a grandfathered business that county zoning recognizes as grandfathered or authorized, that we don't want to make things difficult for you this summer. We don't want to make you get permits unless you're actually building something. But we expect that the level of activity should be the same, and maybe it's half inside and half outside compared to normally all inside. So that's basically what this email is about. And we've gotten really positive response and feedback about it. So if anybody's got any questions about it, like I said, I hope it's okay that I went ahead and did it. I wanted to get it done before Memorial Day.
I think it was a reasonable effort to adjust.
Right, and I tried to make it very clear with some language from Grant as well that this is just for this time period. This isn't, in perpetuity. And I tried to make it clear that it's not a complete free for all. If you're going to build something, you do need a permit and that kind of thing. So, but that's all we have for correspondence that's unrelated to one of the hearing items.
Okay, review and act the minutes on May 7th.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? One of my questions, and you see you have a letter at the end on our packet for the capital expense little addressing.
Oh, well, we've got some. Are you talking about the budget?
We got
CIP, the 750,000.
Right. So our motion was to put, if I remember correctly, was postponed. That was the intent.
Yes.
For any discussion until we start talking about 2022 budget.
Yes.
Okay,
so we can get into that when we get down to item 7 if you want, because I listed all the budget items. It actually, because we talked about it at the last meeting, it is in the minutes from the last meeting. If I didn't capture the motion correctly, let me know. But I do have budget matters to talk about today in the ending part of today's packet.
Okay.
But did I capture the motion correctly from the last meeting?
I just was wondering, making sure that you read it and you were happy with the motion. Okay. That's all I was interested in. Any comments or questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Let's go to the zoning matter, RPC amended Door County Comprehensive Zone in Chapter 14. Looking for motion and a discussion.
Well, I'll make a motion to adopt zoning ordinance chapter 14 as presented.
And move it to county board for approval.
To county board for approval.
Second that.
Okay, second by Roy. Discussion.
Okay, now this is a tower ordinance. all-encompassing tower.
Broken into sections based on use.
Everybody that spoke was concerned about broadband. Now, I'm not a tech person like you or Mariah is. Well, you know, a lot more so than I am. So my question is, I'm okay with having this ordinance, but there seems to be some
Disconnect.
some thought out there that broadband is a little different and could be handled differently than in an all-inclusive Chapter 14. We could still leave Chapter 14, but is there some way we can do something with these broadband towers? And they're a separate type of tower, correct? Am I understanding?
Not necessarily. They can be the identical towers.
Okay, but for broadband purposes, can we do something that would isolate that broadband situation, that we could make it so that more people could be covered with that broadband service?
It's a subsection.
Well, Grant might want to chime in here, especially because he's been sitting here all afternoon too, but I think, as I understand it, we shouldn't pick the service, but you could pick, like, if you wanted to say, we're going to exempt a certain type of structure. Does that make sense? So you don't care what's up on the top of the tower, but we're going to exempt towers that are whatever it is, this height, this radius, this whatever combination of factors you'd want to pick.
Whatever it is,
but
that with your understanding of what these people are asking for broadband coverage, that we could facilitate that.
I think the way what she's getting at is the way the ordinance is written, you can't, and the state statutes are written, you can't really pick a service intent.
Well, that's what Grant has talked about for the last couple of years, is that you definitely don't want to favor a particular company, so you need to be careful about how you word things. Like that tower that went up in Claybanks a couple months ago was a broadband tower.
Yeah.
It was an AT&T tower. It had other things on it, but it was a
I remember you talking about that, and mentioned you can't separate one from the other and give one preferential treatment. And that's kind of what my statement would be interpreted as, that I'm asking for broadband to get special treatment.
Even what, again, I don't remember the phrase, it's actually out of the federal regulations. You can't unfairly discriminate or treat one particular technology more favorable than another. But one of the core issues, and I was going to ask Jason, but he left, is what is broadband? The definition in the statute, and that's, I think, part of the issue here, applies to wireline, wireless communications facility to provide broadband communication services.
In a very simple nutshell, it's high-speed internet. And quite honestly, many of the wireless systems we have don't even meet that requirement.
You mean in Door County?
In the country.
Oh.
What about all the money that's...
This qualifies as broadband.
Okay, then Mr. Warwick brought up and alluded to, is there some way that is that there? And if so, can we tap into it?
He may know more about the funds than I do, but my guess would be that he is talking about the grants that a number of Door County towns applied for this past year. The only one of which they got awarded was Nassau-Waupee. I don't know what the different projects were that each town applied for, but I know that Nassau-Waupee is the only one that got an award. I believe those are from the state, but it might be federal dollars that are being funneled through the state.
Okay.
We're jumping all over the place, but that was one of the reasons back in 2017, we passed the broadband network projects section of this ordinance to get Door County certified as a broadband forward community under 196.504 of the statutes, which helps us out in theory in applying for some of these.
That is precisely one of my conflicts here, is the way it's written in part is to qualify for that state designation that gives the county an extra point towards getting grants.
Okay. Well, and the other question I'd ask is, yes, everybody says Door County is unique. Well, all 72 counties are unique in their own way. But I understand why we have problems with the exposed bedrock from the cliffs and that. But are we alone? Other counties in the state or in the whole country have the situation we do here in Door County, where isolated pockets are not getting service, correct?
Have you been in Violet County?
Yeah, I was gonna say, the parts of Wisconsin are even way worse than we are.
Right.
Okay.
Where you have 120-foot pine trees?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking of as we were discussing this thing.
I mean, so you had asked the question, are we regulating broadband out of Door County? And I think, I don't know if Jerry's still online or not, but we have actively provided these amendments to DC broadband, and Grant and I met with them and a number of other people last fall. And these text amendments are what came out of that meeting last fall. The only thing we're not doing that they want us to do with these amendments, I'm not saying that you can't do this if you don't want to. The only thing these amendments don't do is exempt them. That's essentially what DC broadband wants. They don't want to be regulated at all. So some of the people today suggested, like David Studebaker suggested, maybe the broadband section, like Grant said, which we already got certified by the state, maybe that gets rewritten to be broadband specific. I don't know if that would even make DC broadband happy.
Well, then you have to talk wireless broadband. You really need to get specific, because broadband is also wired.
Yeah.
But then if we do that, I'm trying to understand this, I really am. Wouldn't that go against what Grant said? Wouldn't we be segregating one element of this and giving them a perceived edge?
That notwithstanding, and again, it goes back to definitions, and I think part of this is everybody is searching for a solution to a problem we all recognize that we in Door County and many other rural parts of the country are underserved with broadband. But I think that the laser focus from the comments today was on small wireless broadband towers. Okay, and again, I've said this at other meetings, tell us what those are. You know, a tower that's 200 foot in height, with guide wires or 125 foot freestanding tower. I don't know how big the one was in the town of Claybanks that was built, but it may have, a broad exemption may exempt things we don't want to exempt.
And that is part of the issue, I agree.
Yeah, the Claybanks one, that one was at least 3 feet tall. I don't remember. I mean, as far as, so again, just to remind you, you can forward these on to county board as is, if they want to modify them, whatever. Or you can decide you want to pull back. I guess my feeling is that at the very least, those cleans up some things that DC broadband didn't like, and it exempts those small wireless facilities, which is a new statute section of the state, which we didn't even cover before. If you wanted to tweak some things that are in here, you can recommend that modified petition to county board, and then again, it just won't kick in for 40 days. Like what I've pulled up right now on the screen is the page where the exemptions are listed, which is on page 71. So support structure is 50 feet or less in height. If you want to pick a different number, you can stick a different number in there.
But that came from the state statute regulations as well, right?
Well,
so that's why the number showed up.
We picked that number because it matches the wireless facility exemption number.
Yes.
But again, you could pick a different number.
So I'm gonna ask several questions real quick here. Number one, anybody's taking Nina all the way down to where it turns right and heads out to S?
Yeah.
Okay, past TTX.
Yeah.
There is a cell tower out there, a monotone. One tower, I don't know if the antenna is running or not. That would fit within these regulations technically as being exempt. It's only 45 feet, I think. I'll say part of my history, when my kids went to Gibraltar, they can say what they want. You can have it available and claim that it's available to everybody. I would not have been able to afford it. So you can say what you want as far as the regulations go, but it's another thing to be able to afford the service. And the other thing is, we require people to get a permit for a porch, for a deck, what would the cost of a 20 by 20 deck be on the side of the house for a zoning permit?
I have to go, our fee schedule is by square footage, 100 or 200 bucks.
Okay. So you want to put a deck on a house, and you as a homeowner have to spend $100 to $200 for the deck, provide all the legal requirement for documents. This is a homeowner, and we're expecting we're being asked for a singular business, and now I'm going to be a little bit like you were earlier, a singular business to not have to pay $100 and provide documentation that reasonably supports that what he's putting up is not going to be a detriment to the neighbors. Something that can fall over. I don't care how well you build your deck, even if it's a 3rd-story deck, it's probably far enough away from the neighbor's lot line that if it tipped over sideways, it still wouldn't hit the neighbor. So, you know, I think what we've done is a reasonable effort to bring some of these regulations into place. And it's not an unrealistic request.
If I can take a segue, then I'll shut up. I've been largely quiet for 5 hours.
We get paperwork done.
When we did the revisions, I think Mariah and I saw this as an attempt to balance the interest between the need and placement of facilities for broadband services and the regulatory interest of the county that you're talking about that are legitimate. It's a step in the right direction. So it's one of those, I don't know that we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we can, again, amend the ordinance down the road, and perhaps it does need some work, but again, I go back to, we all accept there's a problem, but we're struggling to find a solution. Not quite sure we're there. Final thing, Mariah, Ken had to leave. He didn't expect this to last as long as it did, and had scheduling conflicts. He left a written note that I gave to Mariah.
I was going to just bring that up. So Ken Paddock, County Administrator, said that, because he's part of the work group that the Door County Economic Development Corporation has, the TAC committee, which I believe
should be part of the entity looking at those grants for the county and that stuff.
Right, I don't know if they were. My understanding is the grants that the towns applied for last year, the towns did the applications with some from DC Broadband. So Ken's note said the work group wants to, I think it means that he wants, that they want broadband only facilities to be exempt. I think that's that. Or they want the chapter to be repealed completely and allow the towns to regulate.
Who is this?
Ken Paddock.
No, I know that, but he's writing.
He's part of the DCEC technology group.
What is it? Broadband forward or whatever that thing is.
I don't know.
So doesn't that go against what Grant just can't exempt to give?
Well, even more important, what is broadband only? Would it include AT&T Tower? One of the things we've talked about periodically is, do you say, okay, it's a 200-foot tower, 125-foot tower. What's the diameter of the tower at the base?
We had a discussion a couple years back.
What sorts of equipment or antenna are you putting on? And there's examples of that in the statute for other situations.
And to go to that point, AT&T, the several times they've been in our audience and spoke, they have made a point of telling us that they provide broadband services.
Yes, and I don't want to get into the situation where we isolate one, not even by company name, but by broadband, because why would we put up a tower and only put one thing on it if we could put multiple things on it? Because that just encourages more towers overall. And I know, I agree that it would be nice to have a whole countywide plan, but as towns are opting out of this as well, and villages in the city are already not in it, I don't see in the immediate future how that could happen.
I will say that
you don't want 200-foot towers on every 40 acres.
In the old.
Isn't that what she's talking about?
Yeah, so a couple of, in the previous iteration of this chapter, when it was a standalone ordinance, we actually required for the towers that were regulated that when a new tower went up, you had to allow for the capacity for 2 or 3 other company for a total of 4 to go on that tower. I believe that's something the state just said we cannot require anymore.
Well, the state used to allow it, now they pull it right out.
So that's an issue. We do have companies that share towers I believe the company we've been talking about does not. But yeah, so you're right, I mean, even if we were to if you wanted to repeal the chapter at this point, the city and the villages are still doing their own thing. Then if we repeal it, then it would be it still wouldn't be a patchwork because the towns would either regulate them or not. And I believe most of the towns that are regulating them, all they do is require a building permit for $100. I don't think that they have any setbacks or anything like that.
So they're still paying the fee, so economically.
The only thing I will say that I either have forgotten or didn't remember that was a potential expense was when David Studebaker brought up the driveway requirement. I don't remember. I'm not sure if we've enforced that. But again, if you have the ability to drive in there, I don't think we said you have to gravel the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm okay with
as presented.
With it as presented. Pass it on. A lot of work's gone into it. We've like Maya said, we've made it better. Let's pass it, get it out there, but some concerted effort to somehow handle this broad and high-speed internet is what they're talking about. That we figure out some way to handle this or get some group working at finding some kind of solution for us.
And we've been dealing with it the last 3-4 months, 6 months, it's about 10 various meetings, and we've even asked, look at the numbers. Give me thousands of dollars. What are those numbers? Roy.
Mariah sent us this email back on April 3rd, and so I and a couple town supervisors printed. I didn't think I'd ever be on this committee to talk about it for 6 hours. Anyway, the 1 through 7 we said that's excellent. Now, hearing on this today, the only thing that I heard is that give us some more height. We got 50 feet as exempt, maybe go to maybe 190 feet, but that's something to consider. But then I looked at other towns, what kind of regulations they put in their ordinances that they exempt. And the only thing they put in there, we want a $100 fee. And that's so if you pay me $100, here's your permit, don't put a tower.
And quite honestly, as a town chairman, as a retired town board member, does $100 even come close to paying your cost of processing?
Absolutely not. And so, from our standpoint, in our township, then we investigated permits or grants. And yes, this broadband company said there's 3 areas that there's lack of service. And so if we were to go with a grant for them, they would be applying to each tower would be $300,000 with 3 grants, and the grant would be for $150,000. The municipality would come up with $75,000. The provider would come up with $75,000. Well, the municipality, in our case, is not going to come up with $75,000 for it.
That's hard.
So that so that's where your small municipalities are not going to be participating in a grant program where they got to come up with 25% of it.
And that doesn't even get you a service.
No.
You're still paying the monthly fee.
Yeah, we have to ask them, then the customer has to pay the monthly fee. That's right.
And that's for 1 tower. You might need 2, 3, 4 towers in your town to really cover everything.
That'd be
emergency.
That's right. But in this case, was needed 3 towers, so that's $900,000.
And your township is relatively flat, very few click-story bonus on the grant.
Again, this goes back to, this is a little bit off topic, but I think what we have to remember or forget sometimes is, but for the county partnering with private corporations and other governmental agencies, Patty Bickman got towards it a little bit with the Southern River School District, there is now a dark fiber background bone that runs the length of our county that most public entities have looked into. At the very least, they were given an opportunity to look into, and the county was a conduit for that. So we have been active in taking concrete steps to move things forward, and we're better off for it. Not to say that we don't have more steps to take, we certainly do, but it's not like we've done anything in the last 10 years.
And but for the contract we have with that provider, we can't move out into the private sector. So that's why we're handling where we're tied to those public entities, the schools, municipalities.
Possible.
Not possible.
I wanted to say one thing. We did it, so after the meeting at Grant and Becky, I should say Becky did most of the drafting for original chapter and the amendment, with Grant. DC Broadband had brought up the idea of exempting towers that met certain wind load standards. And so I can't remember if we asked for information from them or if Becky did research or both on that. And it was complicated engineering and math that we just decided that would not be a very practical thing for us to regulate, because we would have to hire somebody every time to look at the calculations to say, oh yeah, that tower, that's exempt. So I think the idea of, again, not by service, but if you want to exempt a particular type and base and height or whatever the combination is of tower, that maybe that makes sense for a next step. Again, I don't want to try and write it right now.
We're not gonna solve anything right now.
No, I think we beat that horse pretty far.
Move on, been here
Yep.
like,
Yep.
5 hours, 6 hours.
So,
Jeez.
if there's no other comments, looking for all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
So we got, Vinny and Biz as no.
Did you say?
I didn't say no, I said yes.
Oh, see, I'm sorry, I need to learn to wait, you talk at the same time Biz did.
Okay, so 4-1 for.
I wondered why you said no.
Okay.
Okay, budget matters, can we breeze through those relatively quickly speaking?
Yeah, so.
What page does that start on here?
98, I think.
Yeah, actually go up a little bit. So, yeah, we can try and be really quick here. So, starting on page 96 of the packet, Ken Peck and Steve Wimberforth had asked a while back for departments to analyze their budgets looking forward. I think they mostly had COVID-19 in mind. So I provided you with that email just because I figured it'd be interesting background. We are rocking this year. We have been so insanely busy this winter and spring, and we're up permit-wise and dollar-wise. We're down expense-wise because we haven't had the third zoning administrator since the middle of January. Michelle just started last week. So unless things change in the next handful of months as far as like aftershocks of COVID-19, I think our budget is absolutely fine for this department for this year. So that was the first item. And then I did provide you the year-to-date. It goes through like May 28th because that's when I had to put the packet together. So as you can see from that, we're not out of whack on anything as far as expenditures or revenues. Then the things that you actually need to review for me to be able to send on for the 2021 budget process. So our vehicle replacement service, or vehicle replacement thing, that chart is on page, sorry, I can't get the page.
That's 102 for 102.
Okay, yeah, 102. We still have 4 vehicles. We're still not planning on replacing the Dodge Dakota when it dies. The Chevy Cobalt that John Tegler drives, he says it's still fine to go another year or 2.
Really?
It seems like it is. So,
He might be trying to retire with it.
yeah. So that I'll need some kind of motion or recognition, I guess, on that one to pass it, or unless you want to do these all as a bundle to get there at the.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2021 vehicle replacement plan.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay,
Second.
any other discussion on it? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
So you don't want to vote on the 2020 review. The 2020 that was just noted.
Do you need a motion for
I
that?
don't think so. It was more FYI.
No.
This one is, so I put together the 2021 tech services capital outlay and software requests. Basically, we're getting that new permit system to replace the AS400. So we now are going to want and need the ability in the field to have tablets where we can access that online permitting system.
Hold on, you didn't have that capability before. Why do you need to have it now?
Because we're trying to get everybody to apply online, so we want all that. We're trying to go as paperless as possible moving forward once we hit the line in the sand, which probably won't be until 2021. So John and Chris Olson both have individual smartphones for work because they are both out in the field about 75% of the time. And both of their phones are really old. One of them is really, really old. I don't remember which one. The ZA, the zoning administrators, actually still share a flip phone. So I'm saying that we should get one smartphone for them. They don't go out in the field at the same time, so they can share the phone. And then 3 tablets. So again, the zoning administrators will share a phone and a tablet. John and Chris will each have their own. And that'll allow us to work out in the field. Now, the interesting thing is that you can go ahead and vote, and I would like a motion on this if you support it, but we were probably actually gonna do this in 2020 rather than 2021, because we had an expenditure line item for 2020, which was to get a new scanner for when that new permit system comes in. And we realized that we don't really need it because we have other copiers that can do scanning, and we don't need something that's just a standalone dedicated scanner, because we don't have a staff person that can sit there and scan all day or even half a day anyway. So I'm bringing these to you kind of as an FYI. They may end up in the 2021 budget, but we might actually do them this year. So
That being said, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the 2021 tech outlay requests for 2020.
Second that.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
okay.
Opposed?
Oh, sorry.
No, I watched your lips go, yeah, I can't hear her.
So does somebody else have the agenda? How many budget items do we have?
Capital improvement plan.
Capital improvement plan.
Okay, so you voted at your last meeting, as I understood it, to not even talk about the addressing sign replacement program for another year. I was asked to submit it anyway. So I provided the email where I forwarded the worksheets to Ken Paddock and Steve Wipperford. There's two different worksheets in here because I have the one that I had done for you guys last time, which I never completed because you voted not to talk about the project until next year. And then there's a one on page later, which is page 106, that Ken had done to put it in 2022. So I guess you need to tell me what you want to do, because I've not been involved in the capital improvements plan process before, so I'm not clear on what should happen here.
Okay, so my understanding is any capital improvement plan, and maybe I've got this wrong, the committee overseeing the department that is looking to have put something into the capital improvement plan has to approve the request to have it put into the capital improvement plan. You've been around longer than I have, so is Biz. Am I missing something here?
Well, you're missing the fact that the county administrator outranks all of us.
Kind of, sort of, but we have a procedure.
We have a procedure. Now, we certainly have the right to say, no, we don't want to even talk about this in 2021. We're pushing it back to 2022. If the administrator wants to work it into the budget for 2021, I believe the administrator has that authority.
Okay, but put in the capital improvements plan as written.
Yeah.
The oversight committee has to approve it to be put into that plan. So correct me if I'm wrong, if we didn't make that approval, if we don't right now, there has to be some other avenue in which to get it in the capital improvement plan then that I'm not aware of, right?
It's the administrator always.
It's true, but I'm looking at the procedure, the way the procedure is written. That's all I'm looking at.
So when he told me he wanted to do was put it in as, I think he used the word placeholder for 2022. So that if you look at the page, whatever that page is, 106.
106 is the one with the 675.
I do think his estimate is low compared to the research that
Makes me concerned because I thought Chris is low.
Yeah. So, but again, I don't care. You just tell me what number you want to use, and if you want to put it in there, or if you don't want it in, or if you want to make a recommendation not to put it in there, or whatever. I don't.
Right. Move that we leave that at 750 and put it in 2022.
I'll second that.
So we went from not wanting to discuss it at all to putting it in the cap after all.
Well, for 2022.
2022.
Oh, I thought we had that discussion last month. So maybe
Right, so that's why I asked earlier if I had gotten the motion correct from the last time, because my understanding was that you weren't even sure you were gonna wanna do it at all. And because you didn't wanna talk about it for a year.
Besides the fact we have not become in part because of COVID-19, we have not got responses back from the municipality because, it's not just the emergency services that the county provides, it's the municipalities that provide
So
services.
I did forward, after your last meeting, I forwarded, I don't remember why, but I forwarded the minutes. I think I had forwarded them for some other reason to all of the towns. And I did hear back from a couple of towns saying that they were glad that we had shelved that project potentially because they didn't think that it was a good use of county money at this time. I don't know if they'll think it's a better use next year or whatever. But yes, that's part of what we were gonna try and figure out with the towns was if they were gonna be able to shoulder some of the burden. I think that's highly unlikely in next year or two.
Well, but there's one of my difficulties is because, half the services are provided by the town. Vinny, did you have a comment?
Just the same, I don't want to approve to put it in a 2022 budget. There's too many things unknown. My original intent of that was to table it entirely and bring it back up when we have a better understanding of what a budget looks like in 2 years from now.
And that's the way I was interpreting it as well, because we have the lack of taxes potentially now. We've always been talking about not having any money coming in the near future.
Yeah.
Well,
And we also know, like you made the comment numerous times, that when we create a placeholder, it almost always gets done.
Well,
and I agree with Vinny. I thought we had said we just don't want to do it. By putting it on for 2022, at least we are putting it back another year.
And clearly I misunderstood you. I thought that was the intent, that at the beginning of 2021, we would have discussions about putting it on the 2022 project.
Oh, I see.
That's what my understanding of your motion was to be.
Mine as well. I thought you wanted a year from now to talk about when or if you wanted to do the project.
Right.
Because I actually asked you to clarify what your intent was, because we're just beginning that other budget cycle for 2021.
Yeah. And that would be okay. So put it in for 2022 and we don't have to talk about it till next year. But then if the committee stays the same and that's the committee's intent, then early on, the committee will need to say, no, this is not going to go and we're taking it off.
And the likelihood of that occurring is much less.
Well, no. I think we're all pretty much of the same mind here that this is not a good way to spend $750.
And not just this 5.
Oh, no, there's others that agree with us.
Yeah.
So in any case, we still have a motion.
I also forwarded it to Tammy and Aaron as well, so that
They're aware of the.
I never heard back.
Okay. So as it stands right now, though, we have a motion and a second.
Which
to
I
put
don't
it,
think I wrote down. Was it Roy that made?
Roy and then Ken, to actually put it on the 2022 capital outlay at the original dollar value of $750, $750,000.
It's a proposal, that's right.
Wow.
Placeholder.
Yeah.
Maybe for the first time ever, we can put a placeholder into that really
Ends
up only being a placeholder in a
right.
way.
So should I call it a placeholder for discussion?
Well,
Can I ask a question about a placeholder? Does a placeholder mean that the funds cannot be used for something else between now and then because it's held? Because I definitely would not want to do that. What if we end up needing the funds for something next year?
Well,
Based on this.
actually, all this really would do as a placeholder, which we've always had a term, but we've never actually defined what it is we put something in the capital improvements plan with no definition of where the money's coming from.
Oh, so then so on Ken's form, he put the money in the other.
Well,
it's his prior year carryover, so I didn't know what that meant.
My understanding is it has always been said as a placeholder. It's not, it's like a starting point for that year's budget. You go there, well, here's a placeholder, we have this. What do we need here? Do we need it or not? And then it goes to the committee to say, do you want to use that or not, or add that in the budget? That's the way it's supposed to be, so that the committee can say no.
There's some logic to using it as a memory tool.
Yeah.
So come January, we say, oh, that's right, we wanted to spend this next year. But I don't see that as being the case here.
Yeah, I think putting it to 2022 is okay, as long as we and so many others feel the same way, that it's something might change and also the county falls into all kinds of money, or this project gets down to 150,000 where we think, yeah, it's going to work.
Well, so that's a big point what you're saying, because we never discussed this, where the funds are coming from.
Right.
And that's what happened last month.
You never actually voted to do the project.
We were voting to basically discuss the project next year's beginning of next year for the budgeting of 22.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, just so you understand, in my mind, you're actually giving strong approval because you're creating a placeholder
to the project.
In this case, Camp Havoc has actually created a location for the funding, which is what we're supposed to provide. At the same time, last month we did not have a location for the funding. He's picking other as a carryover.
But we don't worry about that if it's put for the fall for 2022.
But when we submitted a request to go to see, if you follow the procedure, that's only because I sat on finance for so many years. If you follow procedure, we're supposed to at the same time provide where the funding is coming from. At the same time, even if all we're doing is creating a placeholder.
I understand what you're saying.
So we don't have a prior year's carryover, it's gone.
We always do, we know that.
Well, so, okay, if I may, then if that is Vinny, that's your stance, just to take it off of there, correct?
Well, I guess my stance is to not have a carryover or a placeholder because I foresee that much money might be needed for something, no offense, but more important in another area in the county based on what's going on with the budget in the state and in the county overall. That's my intent of that decision.
And that's substantially similar to how I feel about it.
And I feel the same way. I think we pretty much all do. So I'd be okay with taking back my second. If you want to
I'll take back my motion.
I'll take back my second, and we can make a new motion and just take it off the table.
And that's to reiterate our comment from last month. Is that what we're?
Yeah.
Reiterate our motion from last month.
However, did the minister say he wanted it in there?
Well,
He told me to put it in there. And that's where I was like, okay, I just stuck it on the list with the budget things today because I wanted you to be aware of what was going on, and I also didn't know which number to use or where to put it or.
And as I read the way the CIP is supposed to operate, I don't disagree. He ultimately has the budget. He has certain aspects of his world, but as we follow our procedure states that if this item is going to be put into CIP from a department, the oversight committee has to approve that request and provide where the monies are coming from. If he so chooses to do something else through the administrative committee, so be it.
Well, let's just take it off, and he can come back to the RPC committee to explain if he chooses then to put it back in, why he does so. But for us, we'll take it off.
Vinny?
Just a quick question for Mariah. I kind of got hung up on this because $750,000 is a lot of money. Do you need any money from that for replacing the signs that are falling down that you regularly do, as needed? Would you want us to?
We would be doing that through fees that we work. Yeah, I mean, the fee that we have in place for individual property owners would cover those.
Right, thank you.
And I'm more scared that I don't think the 750 is enough. I look at those hours and the numbers, I don't know that that's enough to hit this entire county.
Yeah, Marinette County spent quite a bit more than that, and they used similar. So is there a motion or like you made a motion?
Not yet. We rescinded both the original motion.
But we're planning to do something, aren't we? Are we planning to do something?
There's a high probability that at some point in time, when the ordinance in my mind, when the ordinance for the addressing was created, there was no provisions made at that time for how you handle aging.
And well, yes, we did. The aging is paid for by the customer.
Individual owner of the lot, correct. But bulk aging, I guess, is what bulk replacement.
Well, then bulk replacement is a completely different design.
Yes.
Yep.
And that's how this came about, is that we had requests from fire departments for a complete design.
Step back. It came from the sheriff's department
or sheriff
and the 911 services, the ambulatory services, and then from the fire departments.
So we know we're going to have to do something in the future. So you should put it in the CIP 20, 22, 23, 24, 25. You know you're going to be doing something in the next 5 years. You know you're going to do something.
And
well,
you've been quiet.
I think it should be taken out right at this point because of the predicament we're in and the revenues that that we've lost.
projections. The state's in worse shape than we are.
I'll make a motion, we just take the $750,000 for the new signage right off the CIP.
For now.
Just do.
I guess my comment would be, we already voted to do that.
Yeah.
And my comment would be, if we wanted to do a reaffirmation vote.
That's what we're doing.
To basically reaffirm our original vote last month.
We'll talk about it till next year.
So you got a second right there.
So you first.
I made that motion.
Who's second?
Does that make sense to you, Benny?
Yes, thank you.
It makes me nervous to have a $750,000 project that will probably be $1 million really when we get done with this. And that's not counting any of the, we'll go back to this, none of the villages or the city, because they're in a different part of our world. And they be paying for services they're not getting paid for, which is not unusual. It does happen. So, and are you done with this horse?
No.
If you vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. It does scare me to see what the potentials are coming over the next 2 years.
And then obviously the FYI, we have no non-CIP outlays for next year, so you're done with budget items.
Great. Okay.
Do you want me to walk you through all 500 pages of educational and resource materials that are online?
No.
Every one of them.
Yeah, we got till midnight.
What was the meeting you said you wanted to get to?
Yeah, I mean, normally
I'm sorry.
Normally at the beginning of a term, I do kind of walk you through those. I will confess that I have not updated them from 2 years ago, but I did look and the statutes are still relevant. And so I guess that's more just a reminder that on the new website, when you go to the Land Use Services Department homepage and kind of scroll down, there's a Resource Planning Committee section, and then there's 2 links there, all the statutes that we have to deal with for our different program areas, and then just kind of general information that's specific to plan commissions. So, if you feel like doing some educational or refresher reading, that's where they are. And then Roy, I'd be happy to meet with you separately at some point if you have questions about any of the stuff that's on there. You've probably seen some of it as a town official anyway. So. Okay.
Okay. Future meetings, so we've already determined we're not having one on the 18th.
Yeah, wait, I missed. Okay. Correct. You do not have a meeting on the 18th. We actually don't have any hearings for July 2nd either, if you want to hold off and not meet until July 16th.
I would probably say that that's too close to the 4th of July for no matter what.
Yeah.
Some of these parties not going on, but.
Next meeting is July 16th?
Yeah, I mean, unless you could think of a reason, I can't think of a reason for us to meet on July 2nd. We definitely don't have any hearings for June 18th or July 2nd.
Okay.
What time is gonna work for you, Chairman?
So that's one of the questions here. Clearly I like the 3 o'clock, but that's variable. I still want the remaining 4 people to give me their opinion. Right now, we're still underneath in July, we're still gonna be in this configuration issue, right?
As far as I know, we're still gonna be,
Okay, Vinny, does this time, so what works best? Again, for me, it's the afternoon. I kind of need that.
I think the only reason that we picked earlier today was because we thought that one of these hearings might be long.
Well, and look, it took us 15 minutes for text, right?
Right, which didn't happen last time,
Oh,
or the last 2
I know. So Roy, is 3 o'clock okay with you?
Sure.
Biz?
It's okay if we don't have a 6-hour meeting.
I will say that I'm more than willing to recognize the need to move a meeting forward if it's gonna end up being any number of hours.
Like I said, I don't think we have any applications that would be super contentious. Definitely none that'll be ready before then. I mean, I guess if 3 weeks ahead of time, it's starting to seem like one of them might be long. If we've got something for the 16th, I can check in and see if people can meet.
So maybe we might need to adjust that before you send out the agenda.
For right now, we will assume that the next meeting.
And Vinny, 3 o'clock works for you?
Yes, that's great.
So July 6th.
Thank you.
At 3 o'clock is our presumed next meeting.
Okay, and the only variable would be for all to know, including anybody that might be listening, that if it turns out that the department feels the agenda item might be long, we might move it it forward, but we would only do that just before the agenda, whatever documentation you have to send out.
Right, and
Officially.
we'll know by the end of, we'll know in 2 or 3 weeks, because we have to do the notice 3 weeks ahead of time.
Right. So we'll have plenty of time to know that it might be before 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
So that being said, per diem code 604.
Mr. Chairman, with that being done, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I don't know if I can allow that. Who wants to make a second? Vinny?
Second.
Biz? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, gentlemen. And for those that are still listening,
And lady,
and lady, yes.
or ladies,
And those that are still listening, thank you for sitting through this. This has not been a short meeting for us.
and that's,